It feels like every year the definition of a budget knife gets a little bit crazier because not that long ago, spending around 60 bucks meant you're probably getting some pretty basic materials, arguably a rather generic design, and something that was totally usable for sure, but not really all that exciting. But now here in 2026, the competition around this price point is just absolutely ridiculous. And this knife today might be one of the best examples I've seen so far. This is the Maxace Black Mirror S, and the crazy thing is, this knife starts at just over $60. And for that, you're getting a 14C 28N blade, a really interesting mix of G10 and shredded carbon fiber in the handle, pretty smooth action, and most importantly, a knife that looks absolutely nothing like your typical budget folder. And I've gone through a lot of budget knives on this channel lately, and I've kind of been recently trying to move away from a little bit because there's just so darn many. I can really only handle so many Kaisers and Civivis as there's just so many new releases one after the other, and I can't really keep up. So I'm going to recommend another budget knife. It really needs to do something to stand out. And I really think this Black Mirror S kind of does exactly that. So today we're going to take a closer look at the design, the materials, the action, some things I really like, a few things I don't, and ultimately whether this knife deserves to be called one of the best budget knives of 2026. So let's get into it. Now, Maxace is a really interesting company because they're definitely not exclusively just a budget knife brand. If anything, I feel like they're probably better known for some of the more premium and wild designs out there, and I really didn't even know they had a budget line until I picked this guy up. And this is, though, definitely in the budget category, you can absolutely see kind of more premium styling here. And crazy enough, this style of knife, this Black Mirror name, itself isn't even new. They've actually used this Black Mirror platform for more premium knives in the past. Think titanium, carbon fiber, better blade steels. But this knife here, this Black Mirror S, it takes that general idea and kind of scales it down and brings it to a more approachable price point. And I think that what makes this knife so interesting. It doesn't really feel like they sat down and just said, okay, let's just design a really cheap budget knife. It feels like they took the personality of a more premium knife and kind of saw where they could save a couple bucks and just scaled it down without stripping away what made it interesting. And I don't know about you, but I think they kind of nailed it visually here. There are a lot of different configurations and variations of this knife available on their site, different colors and whatnot, but this combination kind of caught my eye the most because you don't really see that many white knives right now. And this kind of paired with the shredded carbon fiber inserts, I think it looks a little bit futuristic and just very different from a lot of knives out there right now. And that said, I really like this knife and I like this back spacer, but I'm not sure blue would have been the color I would have gone with just because it seems like there's a lot going on here. This pop of color really doesn't fit. But still, for a knife around 60 bucks, I feel like this looks so much more expensive than it really is. Now let's run through the actual specs because this lands pretty much right in that sweet spot for an everyday carry knife. The overall length comes in just a little bit larger than 7.6 inches, and then we have a blade steel at 3.15 inches. And this blade steel here comes as no surprise, is 14C 28N, and this is heat treated between 59 and 61 HRC. And I think 14C 28N is a really standard popular choice here, and we see tons of knives in this price range rocking this blade steel, and for good reason. Because for this price, this is a really nice steel, and I have zero complaints here. It's stainless, it's relatively tough, it's easy to sharpen, and it can take a really nice edge. For an actual user knife around $60, I think 14C 28N makes a lot of sense here. And then we get to probably the most interesting part of the knife, and that's of course the handle. The handle here is G10 with shredded carbon fiber inlays, and I really like this approach instead of just a slab of normal G10. This gives it a little bit more visual interest, and I think it works pretty well here. This white model is the only one that comes with carbon fiber, and the other models actually come with aluminum inserts that are milled that actually look pretty cool too. I will say the color combos here, again, rather wild, and I'd like to see a more muted version in the future. That's just kind of me being picky. Now, I'm not one to really go crazy on ergonomics, but in hand, this knife is actually a really comfortable size. Due to this kind of curved handle, this fits really well in hand, and it's incredibly comfortable to use and hold. The 7.6 inch overall length means you're getting a really nice full-sized EDC knife without moving into something that's aggressively large. I can get a really comfortable full grip here, and the shape of the handle does a really good job of naturally positioning your hand. There's also the textured backspacer here I mentioned earlier, and then finally, we also have a deep carry wire pocket clip. And I absolutely love these wire pocket clips, and this one is no exception. It's super deep carry, it's really comfortable in the pocket, and best of all, it draws absolutely zero attention. Now let's talk about the action because this is where inexpensive knives have gotten unbelievably good recently. Just think Civivi, Kaiser, Vosteed, you name it, these companies are just absolutely killing it when it comes to smooth, fun action. And this knife is running on bearings and has a really quick deployment with the blade hole, and it's pretty smooth and satisfying to deploy and close. It's nice, and once you disengage the liner lock, it shuts closed with a shake. But it's not perfect, as you can see right there. Once you go to disengage the liner lock, there's a very slight hang up that you have to push through and break before it shuts. I'll demonstrate it again. Pushing the liner lock all the way to the side, the blade doesn't slam shut. Instead, you have to give a little push to go past a certain point before it drops. It's nice because it won't slam shut on your thumb, but it kind of hampers the action a little bit, so it's kind of a toss-up. There's absolutely no blade play here though, when it's good. The lockup's really nice and solid. This also came really perfectly centered, and outside of the small issue I noticed, the action is pretty smooth, and I love hitting the reverse flick here. It's not the most fidgety knife out there, but it works pretty well. And then once the knife is actually open, you've got a really practical blade for everyday carry. You've got a lot of belly here for slicing, a pretty useful tip for opening packages and more detail work, and enough blade length for pretty much anything I'd really realistically expect from an EDC folder. I really like this blade shape, and it paired with 14C28N, it's a pretty good match. And even though looking a little bit more premium, this isn't a knife I'm actually afraid to use. And that's something that comes a lot more important to me recently, the longer I'm in this hobby. Don't get me wrong, I still love expensive knives, can't afford them, but I love them. But there's also something really nice about carrying a $60 knife like this, beating on it, cutting cardboard, getting tape all over the blade, and just not really carrying as much. And that's where something like this knife makes a lot more sense. It looks considerably more expensive than it really is, but it's still cheap enough that I really wouldn't be afraid to use it and abuse it. And it's kind of in that sweet spot. So now let's talk about the biggest positives here. And number one is probably just obviously the design. It doesn't look like a generic budget knife. You have the inlays, the color backspacer, the wire pocket clip. Everything here just looks more expensive than it really is. And even though I personally kind of hate this blue backspacer here, it's just a really interesting knife, and it looks a lot different when you compare it to everything else coming out right now. Number two is just the materials for the price. 14C28N is not exotic by any means, but for around $60, I think it's exactly the kind of steel you want. And you pair that with the carbon fiber inlays or the milling with the aluminum if you go that route, I just think it's a really good value here. And finally, I just really like the overall shape and just the carry experience. The whole knife has this nice curve. It just fits in the hand really nicely. It's just different from my other modern folders. And pair the comfort in hand to the comfort in the pocket with this deep carry wire pocket clip. This just works really, really well here. But there are a few things to consider. First, I already mentioned it, but just the color options here. I think this is a really good looking knife, so I'm not sure why they went with all these funky color combinations. Even just this really basic white and carbon fiber colorway, they had to add this bright blue backspacer, which I feel like just clashes with the rest of the knife. Just give me this knife in all black or a nice brown. All these other colors, just a little bit too much for me. Second is the action. That little hang up is just a little bit annoying to me, especially when I'm just sitting at my desk and I want something to flick open and close during meetings. Just that little slight bit of hesitation just kind of grows slightly annoying the longer you play with it. Outside of that, that's really only my criticisms here, and I think this is a really, really great knife for the price. So that kind of brings us into the biggest question. Is this actually a good value? Because at the time I'm making this video, this knife is listed roughly at $61 to $70, depending on the configuration you pick. And at that price, yeah, I think this is an extremely competitive knife, because once you get to that $60 to $70 range, I expect quite a lot because that market is just so damn competitive right now. There's just way too many good knives available right now for a manufacturer just to slap G10 on a basic liner lock or throw a cheap steel on it and just expect people to be impressed. You really need something special to stand apart from the rest. And I think this knife has that. It's a pretty distinct design, it has good materials, it has good action, and most importantly, this feels like a knife I would actually want to carry rather than something I'm just plainly recommending based purely on the spec sheet that says it's a good deal. The budget knife market in 2026 isn't lacking any good knives by any means. It's almost suffering from having too many of them. There's hundreds of technically good knives. The harder question is, which ones are actually memorable? Because looking at all the interesting design here, I think this one is a pretty good shout. So is the Black Mirror S the best budget knife of 2026? I'm not ready to crown it the definite winner just yet, but I think it absolutely belongs in the conversation. Because for just over $60, you're getting a 14C28N blade, a really comfortable EDC size, enjoyable action, a really interesting multi-material handle, and a design that really kind of stands out. But best of all, this knife doesn't feel inexpensive. If you're somebody just getting into knives and you want something nice without immediately spending over $100, this is a really easy knife to recommend. And even if you have a collection of more expensive knives, I think there's still something appealing about having a $60 folder that looks this good that you can actually use without worrying about it. The budget knife market has gotten unbelievably competitive over the past few years. And if this is the level of knife that we're getting for around $60 in 2026, I'm really curious to see where things go from here. But for now, the Black Mirror S has definitely earned a spot on my list of budget knives to beat this year. Let me know what you guys think about this knife down below in the comments, 'cause I'd love to hear it. As always, thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.